Good evening. This is a joint meeting of the Water Sewer Commission with the Board of Selectmen and Town Administrator Greg Valenconis. And the purpose of this meeting this evening is to discuss and review, more importantly, review a document, proposal for creation of the Department of Public Works. And you know, there may be no need for any ground rules here, but I would like to suggest to everyone that we keep the conversation on topic and germane to the subject at hand, that we try to avoid opinions and anything that could be viewed as argumentative. I think there's going to be a public hearing on this, at least one is scheduled, and there'll be an opportunity for everybody to participate in that, more in an opinion-based way. At this point, does everyone have a copy of the document that we're talking about? It's dated August 14th, 2015. And why don't we just turn it over to Greg? And if you could just update us on that.
Sure. So there's three documents that I submitted to the Commission. Thank you, Mr. Chairman, first of all, for allowing me to come in. The first document is a summary proposal for creation of the Department of Public Works. It's one page, and it's probably pretty similar to different versions of this that, as I go back in the files, I find things that look like this. So this is something that at least has been presented in the past. The second document that's in your packet is a proposed organizational chart for a new DPW. And then the third document that's in your packet is a draft of what's called special legislation. The special legislation is an act authorizing the town of Dudley to establish a Department of Public Works. Mr. Chairman, maybe I could just update you in terms of what the process is before we start talking about specifics related to the proposals. The process would be the selectmen would need to approve this to be on the warrant for the special act legislation for the fall town meeting. And presuming that takes place, it would then be placed before the residents at town meeting on November 2nd. And if it were to be voted in the affirmative, it would be submitted through Senator Fatman and Representative Durant as special act legislation for the town of Dudley. In which case, it then, if it passes through the legislature, it then goes to the governor to be signed into law, and that likely, if you look at the calendar, not to take place until sometime in 2016. We don't control when that's done. That happens by the legislature's women, depending upon what happens. So throughout that process, in different public hearings, the legislation can be amended and such. But typically, the intent of home rule legislation is to adopt and approve what gets resulting from town meeting. There might be some tweaks and some changes, but by and large, it's particularly important to present to town meeting a document that the board and the town feels comfortable with. So the draft legislation, if I could maybe start with the first page, the DPW proposal for Department of Public Works, just summarizes the items with regard to why the town should consider creation of a Department of Public Works. In my tenure, I came from a town that had a consolidated DPW. I personally felt that it worked well. There was a water and sewer department that was part of that. There was a water and sewer department enterprise fund that was part of that. It worked well. From an accounting perspective, there were no particular problems, and it was similar in structure to what is being presented to you this evening. As I understand, in the past, there was a proposal to create a DPW that would have been part of a larger charter proposal 15 years ago. And the last thing I could find in my files was discussions as a result of a committee sometime in 2013, maybe early 2014, and I really couldn't find what resulted from that. So the board asked me to pick up the ball and and present to them a proposal which you see here. I'd ask you to take a look at the organizational chart. The organizational chart is set up to show that there would be 8 divisions in a DPW, and those divisions would be water and sewer. Oh, if anyone doesn't have it, I'm sorry. If anyone doesn't have it, we have a copy of it here, and I
I don't know why it's not in this.
I think, you know what, I think you got an older version, to be honest with you. Yeah, let me give you this.
Does anyone else need?
Yeah, let me give you this one here, because I probably have to scribble on that. Yeah, here's another one. here.
Alan, anyone else? Do you need one?
Good?
So 8 divisions. The divisions would be water and sewer, recycling and solid waste, highway and roads, cemeteries, parks, and public buildings. Those are the divisions that exist today. But since the town is proposing legislation, and legislation is particularly difficult to amend, we would want to include items that we think in the future might be part of a DPW, and that would be fleet maintenance, and that last one would be stormwater and engineering. So those would comprise the 8 divisions, and each division would be staffed and report to the DPW director. And the DPW director would report up through the chain of command, with ultimately the Board of Selectmen being the CEO of the operation and in charge of the operation. Okay, any questions about the organizational chart? I could maybe this is a good opportunity if the selectman or the FAA member or any are here would like to say anything before I kind of get into the special act legislation, because that may take some time to confuse. Turn it over to Selectman Fox and Selectman Ruda, Selectman Marcy, who's here also.
Mr. Fox?
The Board of Selectmen support this, would like to see it move forward. We think it's important for the town. I think it's the way to go for the future. And I strongly recommend that we get the support from the Water and Sewer Commissioners, and we send this to town meeting in the fall.
Just to amend what Mr. Fox said, this member of the Board of Selectmen wants to hear more, and I'm not determined if I fully support it. I need to know more about the idea. This proposal from Mr. Valiakonis is almost as new to me as it is to everybody here. So.
Yeah, same for me, Dan. I support it in principle, but I want us to go through it like we started last year and see what we can do. Make it work for everybody.
Okay. I think I might have mentioned before that the creation of legislation is kind of where the rubber hits the road. So you can talk about creation of a DPW, but until you actually can create and craft legislation, which is what this is an attempt to do, it doesn't really get anywhere. So I'm not offended if anyone has great ideas, suggestions. Those are all welcome into the process.
Right.
But yes, sir.
Could I make one suggestion?
Yes.
I understand the significance of the legislation, and I understand the complexity of it as well. But in reality, it's quite simple, and it's only germane pertaining to the proposal itself. Could we go over could we start out by going over the working document and act authorizing the town of Dudley? Now, is that the legislation that you're talking about?
It is.
Or is that the actual?
So there would be there'd be a town meeting warrant article which would say to enact to see if the town will vote to approve special act legislation substantially as set forth below. And then
So that's
this
that's
is
the
what we
that's the document then that outlines the actual changes that you're proposing.
It does, and,
Okay.
and it would have to be presented in the format that you would see here at the town meeting. Town meeting can't say we want to create a DPW without knowing what it is.
Okay.
So you have to kind of lay out everything in advance, and that's what this is kind of an effort to do.
Okay. And just in terms of the timetable, so you've said that this actually requires a vote of the selectmen to go forward to the warrant, so that has not happened yet.
That's correct.
Of course, this would also have to be reviewed by town council.
Correct, and it's been submitted to council, and he's reviewing it.
Okay, so that has not happened yet.
Not been completed, but it's been submitted.
Okay. When was it submitted?
Probably about 2 to 3 weeks ago.
Okay. Now, this document that we just received tonight is actually different from the document that I received 3 weeks ago. Is that correct?
It should be minor changes, and I can highlight what those minor changes would be.
That's if you do that for me, I appreciate it.
So let me go right to that, because that's the issue of relevance right now. So if you look at let's see, go to section 7. So the original version of section 7 addressed, the first sentence addresses the Director of Public Works shall appoint, remove, supervise employees of the department in accordance with the town's personnel bylaw and any applicable collective bargaining agreements subject to approval of the Board of Selectmen. So that last piece, subject to approval of the Board of Selectmen, is new. The original version that you may have had may have just simply said, that's it, just administer it. And the way the organizational chart is set up is that ultimately the Board of Selectmen is responsible for all the major hiring, firing decisions of the town, and therefore the legislation needs to include that. And that's the most substantial change. There are some edits of relatively minor changes concerning wording and word choice, but that's the most substantial item, and so the document has been lined up with the Board of Selectmen. Ultimately has final say over matters affecting the DPW.
And that's the only change in these two documents?
Yep, that's the only change of substance.
Okay. And that change has now been included in the information sent along to town council?
It has been. Yes. So, if you don't mind, I can summarize and go through these sections. And the section 1, I think it's easy just to go through one section at a time. Section 1 just establishes what the DPW is and indicates that it's under the Board of Selectmen. Section number 2 defines the duties of the Board of Selectmen as the DPW commissioners, and then goes on to enumerate the major divisions that are within that. It also goes on to state that the Board of Water and Sewer Commissioners' duties are as set forth in Section 8, and we will go forward and talk about Section 8 when I get there. So that's the purpose of Section 2. Section 3 provides that the major portion of this is that the Board of Selectmen would Chapter 41, Section 69B enumerates the powers and duties of the water commissioners, and those would be assumed by the Board of Selectmen under the Act. And then Chapter 44, Section 53F and 1/2 is the statute pertaining to enterprise funds, and it would establishes the fact that the enterprise fund would continue as in place. The other items of significance that are in Section 3 is that all of the property, equipment, and assets, funds and liabilities and assets would transfer from the Board of Water and Sewer Commissioners to the Board of Selectmen when the Act is approved. So that's an item of some significance that's here.
Excuse me 1 second. It just dawned to me it might be helpful for the people at home if we had a reading of this. Perhaps I could read it, and then you could go into detail as far as what exactly it means.
Of course.
So So let's start out with section 1. Notwithstanding any general or special laws or bylaws to the contrary, there is hereby established in the town of Dudley a Department of Public Works, herein called the Department, which shall be under the supervision and control of the Board of Selectmen, herein called the Board. Section 2, unless otherwise noted in this act, the Board of Selectmen shall have all the current powers and duties now and from time to time vested in general or special act of town bylaw in the following boards, commissions, departments, offices, highway department, including the highway superintendent and the surveyor of highways and the water and sewer department, including the Board of Water and Sewer Commissioners. The Board of Water and Sewer Commissioners' duties as set forth in Section 8. No existing contract or liability in force on the effective date of this act shall be effected. Section 3, the Department of Public Works shall have all the functions now or from time to time vested by general or special law or town bylaw in the following departments and offices: Highway Department and Water and Sewer Department. The Department of Public Works shall assume the responsibilities for the operation of the streets and parks related management, care, and maintenance of real property. All equipment, property, facilities, funds, assets, and liabilities under the care, custody, and control of the abolished Board of Water and Sewer Commissioners as of the effective date of this act shall be under the care, custody, and control of the Board of Selectmen. The provisions of Section 69B of Chapter 41 of the General Laws or the provisions of Section 353F and a half of Chapter 44 of the General Laws shall control water-related funds, assets, and liability. Okay, you've already spoken to Section 1, 2, and partially 3. Could you just go into a little more detail about the provisions of Section 69B of Chapter 41 of General Laws or the provisions of Section 53F and a half of Chapter 44 of the General Laws shall control what?
So Section 69B of Chapter 41 is entitled Water Commissioners' Powers and Duties, and it enumerates in the statute the powers and duties of the water commissioners, specifically as it relates to the setting of water rates and prices. It also talks about the appropriation of funds, repair and upkeep of the town's water system. Talks a little bit about the surplus of funds, that any surplus of funds, how that is handled, and lastly, it addresses how rates are set. So that is a real quick summary of Chapter 69B. Section 53F and 1/2. Section 53F and 1/2 is called enterprise funds. And what it does is it states that an enterprise fund is created by a vote of town meeting, and an enterprise fund is intended to separate an account for utilities, healthcare, recreation, or transportation and facilities and its operation, and as the town may designate this as an enterprise. It states that the account shall be maintained by the town treasurer, and that any and all receipts, revenues, and funds derived from the activities of the enterprise fund shall be deposited into the enterprise fund. That further states that the enterprise fund is calculated when the town sets its annual tax rate, which will be coming up in the month of November. And then furthermore, it talks about the enterprise fund, that if there is a surplus in the enterprise fund at the end of the fiscal year, such surplus shall be kept in a separate reserve fund to be used for the purposes provided for in this section. Further, that if there is a deficit that incurs in the account, the deficit shall be resolved in the succeeding fiscal year's budget. So those are the boilerplate templates that establish the Commission's duties in the absence of any bylaws to the contrary, and then also the accounting system that you use for the water and sewer departments. and those will be maintained. The intent of this legislation is to continue the enterprise fund. It's worked well, and there's no reason to think that it won't work well under a consolidated Department of Public Works.
Okay. Under that last line, law shall control water, shouldn't that be water and sewer?
Water and sewer.
Because they are separate funds.
Good point.
And I believe even with consolidating the two boards, the two funds have been maintained separately.
Any other points or clarifications? Okay. Section 4. The Department of Public Works may have such additional powers with respect to collection and disposal of recyclables, garbage, refuge, the maintenance and repair of streetlights, the maintenance and repair of town buildings and property, with the exception of buildings and property under the control of the Board of Library Trustees, unless said trustees consent in writing, and the performance of such duties of any other board, department, and offices of the town may be reasonably related to the duties of the Department of Public Works, as the town may from time to time, by bylaw, provide any other provisions of law notwithstanding.
So as you can see, this section further defines the duties and responsibilities of the Department of Public Works. It recognizes that the library trustees are a separate entity, and under general law, they're responsible for the care and custody of any of their property unless they consent to in writing. And then it further goes on to state that any other town boards or committees, there may be other performance issues as they relate to other town boards and committees that come forth from time to time. So really what it does is it hones in on the other sections of the legislation that aren't addressed in the previous section.
Section 5. No later than 90 days prior to the beginning of each fiscal year, the Board of Selectmen shall convene a public hearing to determine the ensuing fiscal year water and sewer budget and set equitable prices and rates for usage of the water and sewer system. The date, time, and place of the hearing shall cause notice to be published in at least one newspaper of general circulation in the town of Dudley, and shall be posted at the town hall and on the town's website not less than 14 days prior to the hearing. The board will take recommendations from the Water and Sewer Commission and testimony from the interested party, and shall submit its recommendations to the town meeting, which shall, upon the budget in the same manner as all budgets. That seems pretty self-explanatory.
Yeah, there's one change. The 90 days is actually 120 days. And that's consistency with state law. State law says that the hearing shall convene 120 days prior thereto, so we want to make sure that that's changed.
Section 6.
Dan? Yep. The question. The board will take a recommendation from the Water and Sewer Commissioners?
Yes.
Well, Section 8 is going to get into the appointing authority.
Yes.
Okay.
Section 6, the Board of Selectmen shall appoint, fix the tenure and compensation, and enter into a contract with the Director of Public Works subject to the appropriation of the provisions of town bylaw and the personnel bylaws. The Director shall exercise and perform in conformity with the policies of the Board such powers, rights, duties conferred upon the Board of Selectmen under the provisions of Section 2, as said Board may from time to time delegate. The Director of the Public Works shall have full charge and authority over all employees, equipment, facilities within the department subject to the requirements of bylaws, regulations, and such direction and such policies of the Board of Selectmen. The Director of the Public Works shall have a minimum of 5 years of relevant professional experience in the public works, construction, and management. During his or her tenure, the Director of Public Works shall hold no other elected or appointed office, nor shall the Director of Public Works engage in any other business or occupation without prior consent, written authorization, of the Board of Selectmen. The Director of Public Works shall give the town a bond with a surety company authorized to transact business in the Commonwealth as surety for the faithful performance of his or her duties in such sum upon such conditions and the board may require. The town will pay the premium for said bond. The Director of Public Works may designate by letter approved by a majority of the Board of Selectmen and filed with the town clerk a qualified officer of the town to perform the director's duties in case of absence or disability. Pending the appointment of the director, the filling of any vacancy, the failure of the director to designate a temporary director, or during the suspension of the director, the board shall appoint a suitable person to perform duties of the director. Okay?
So this addresses specific qualifications of the DPW director and also his or her duties. You'll note that if you look at the qualifications section, it indicates that this is a person who is experienced in the field and has minimum qualifications necessary for the position. One thing that you will find that is not here is there is no requirement for a professional engineering license. If you follow the newspapers and see what's going on in Southbridge, there are some challenges and problems when you put that requirement in there. Would we like to have a person that's got a PE? Sure. We want to make it as part of our DPW legislation? No, because then it becomes unnecessarily restrictive. A job description can address what the qualifications are for the position versus the particular aspects of this proposal. And that's why it's done the way it is.
Section 7, the Director of Public Works shall appoint, remove, supervise employees of the department in accordance with the town's personnel bylaw and any applicable collective bargaining agreement subject to the approval of the Board of Selectmen. The Director shall appoint and remove such employees as the Director deems necessary subject to town meeting appropriation and approval of the Board of Selectmen. The Director of Public Works shall supervise, direct, and be responsible for the daily operation of the department and all of its functions. This shall include any relevant board or commission appointed by the Director or the Board of Selectmen. The Director of Public Works shall keep full and complete records of the department and shall render to the Board of Selectmen as often as may be required by said board, but at least quarterly, a full report of all the operation under his or her control during a period reported upon, and annually shall render to the board and file with the town clerk a report of all operations under his or her control, including but not limited to a financial report of all accounts, funds, and grants, a work plan with related finance plan for the subsequent fiscal year, and a report on the accomplishments and progress made under the work plan from the pending fiscal year. The Director of the Public Works shall have access to all town books, records, documents necessary for the proper performance of the assigned duties and responsibilities. The Director of Public Works shall keep the Board of Selectmen advised as to the needs of the town within the scope of duties, and shall annually, in conformity with the requirements established by said board, furnish to the board a careful, prepared, and detailed budget and work plan in writing, including estimates of the appropriations and revenue for department enterprise funds established under Section 53F and a half of Chapter 44 of the General Laws as required during the next fiscal year for the proper exercise and performance of all said rights and duties. The Director of Public Works shall perform such other duties consistent with the offices as may be required by the bylaw of the town, by vote of town meeting, or by majority vote of the Board of Selectmen.
Mr. Chairman, again, as I stated earlier in the meeting, the first section here establishes that the Board of Selectmen will continue to be the hiring authority and will be responsible for confirming appointments and or removals, that any on all applicable collective bargaining agreements, the hiring and removal or disciplinary process will be subject to that. There's a section in here that states that the director shall include any relevant or commission appointed by the Board of Selectmen. So what we want to do is we want to have a connection to any board or committee that the Board of Selectmen appoints. If the board appoints a appointed Board of Water and Sewer Commissioners, then we want the DPW to have a responsibility to provide that board with information on a regular basis. Similarly, if the board appoints a recycling committee, some other board, Parks and Recreation Commission somewhere down the road, want to be able to have a connection back that the DPW director ultimately has to work with those people. And that's what the intent of that wording in that section that's simply stated it and briefly. The detailed report on finances, accounts, and grants and work plans, typically that is done as part of the annual budget process. So as part of the annual budget process, the director will need to provide a budget, and the budget will enumerate the accomplishments and progress and the finances from the preceding year and make projections for the year going forward. Again, it reiterates the fact that the appropriations and the revenues that are used to fund certain aspects of the DPW as it relates to water and sewer are established under enterprise funds. Enterprise funds you could run the town solid waste operation on an enterprise fund if you wanted to. It's not limited to water and sewer, but it can be for any particular department that the town meeting decides it's appropriate. It's a vote of town meeting to create it, and it's a vote of town meeting to do away with it. So what we want to do is we want to reference the fact that there's an accountability to the enterprise fund system that's here.
Could you clarify that statement just a little bit further?
Of course.
So the solid waste management, so a separate enterprise fund could be established for the purpose of solid waste management?
Sure.
Okay, so that's what you're saying there.
You could have if you had an active Park and Recreation Commission that took in significant fees, you could have that run as an enterprise fund where the fee revenue is being run to support the department. And I've seen it, and I've done it. We don't have that, but it's not to say in the future the town couldn't look at those as directions, and we want to be able to leave those opportunities open in the future, that if additional funds are created by town meeting and the selectmen, we can operate as enterprise funds. And then lastly, the last section says that the director will perform other such duties consistent with the offices may be required by the bylaws of the town, vote at town meeting, or majority vote of the Board of Selectmen. What we want to do is we don't want to lock in duties and responsibilities and have a person come in and say, this is all I do. There may be other issues that become relevant, and you want to be able to have a person be responsible for that. So that's what I would call boilerplate language, but it's boilerplate language that ultimately protects the town.
Section 8. The elected Board of Water and Sewer Commissioners is hereby abolished. The Board of Selectmen shall appoint an advisory Board of Water and Sewer Commissioners. The Commission shall be responsible for making an annual recommendation to the Board of Selectmen on water and sewer rates, capital improvements as part of the town's capital improvement plan, and proposing to the Board of Selectmen and the Finance Appropriations Committee the annual water and sewer operating budget. Nothing in this section shall permit the Water and Sewer Commissioners to be involved in the daily operation of the department, including the hiring and supervision of employees and approval of warrants.
So, the DPW, I've seen instances in DPW where there's not an appointed Board of Water Commissioners, and we've seen other DPWs where there is an appointed Board of Water Commissioners. I thought that given the expertise of your board, that it was important to retain a board, and that the boards would be involved in not so much the day-to-day operations of the town and the assignment of work, but really handle the big tasks of the water and sewer rates, the annual operating budget, and capital plan. Those are the major responsibilities that I could define and should be defined as part of the statute. So there would be an appointed board. The appointed board would have its duties as defined here related to budgeting, capital, and rate setting. And Those are kind of the major areas that came to mind based upon my experience. Again, the last community that I was in, which was in North Reading, there was a appointed board of water sewer commissioners that was set up much the same way. I think it worked well. I think it worked well because what it did was it gave the Board of Water and Sewer Commissioners an opportunity to be really at a higher level than being involved in the day-to-day operation of the town. But that's the purpose of this section is to involve it in that portion.
And did that board in North Reading, did they set the rates?
No, the selectmen set the rates upon recommendation of the commission.
Okay, so the board didn't set the rates.
Not the water and sewer board, no.
It's strictly an advisory.
Recommended it.
It's an advisory board.
Yeah, when you get to, in my experience is when you get to a public meeting and the board of selectmen have a public meeting to discuss water and sewer rates, they need to trust the members of the board and water sewer commissioners to make a recommendation that they've thoroughly vetted the process and understand everything that's in there. And that's, again, one of the critical aspects is so that you have an appointed board of residents that's kind of watching these things closely and can articulate a recommendation to the board.
Section 9. The Board of Selectmen shall retain all powers, duties, and responsibilities associated with incurring debt.
So yeah, just a quick explanation, only the Board of, so town meeting can authorize debt, but it's interesting that only the Board of Selectmen can actually incur it. So I haven't seen it happen, but you could conceivably have town meeting vote to appropriate or establish debt, and the Board of Selectmen decide that market conditions aren't such and they want to wait, and we can't borrow without the Board of Selectmen specifically approving debt. And the intent is to say that duty and responsibility will continue.
Section 9. Once established, the town of Dudley may modify the duties, powers, and responsibilities of the Department of Public Works. Integration of agencies, departments, or districts not described in this act shall require approval by the majority vote at a town meeting, and the Director of Public Works. Public Works functions, once integrated, may be constituted as independent organizations or departments by a majority vote at town meeting.
So what that says is it gives the opportunity to be flexible in the future. If the town wanted to establish as I said, a parks program that we don't presently have in place right now, or there's some type of state or federal law, no one knew about stormwater 10 years ago, and now all of a sudden stormwater is a very important part of what we do. So if something like that were to come up in the future, and we wanted to include that duty within the DPW, it would take a vote of town meeting to do that.
So we wouldn't have to go to the state legislature to go through all of that.
That's right. But town meeting has to consent.
Puts the town in control.
Of course, and here it says, shall require approval by a majority vote of the town meeting and the Director of Public Works. So again, if town meeting says they want something or don't want something, the Director of the Department of Public Works, excuse me, can just say, I don't want to do that.
Not really, because realistically that person answers daily to the town administrator.
It says
Is
here,
appointed by the Board of Selectmen. You know, there are a lot of dams in this community. I'm just using it as an example. We don't have we don't have a department that's in charge of quote unquote dams, but there may be something in the future that we would want to include in here. And if the Board of Selectmen said make it so, then I would imagine it would be made so. If a person values their position, he's going to say, of course. Of course.
Why do you have two Section 9s?
Oh, good question.
Section 10 and Section 11.
Never catch.
That's a typographical error.
And Section 10. This act shall take effect upon its passage.
The passage refers to the fact that it takes effect when signed into law by the governor. So a vote of town meeting by itself does nothing. It requires enactment and signed into law by the governor to become a law, and it will not take effect until that takes place.
Thank you very much.
Happy to help. I'm happy to answer your questions.
At this point, let me just throw it back to you. Are you through with your presentation?
I am. I mainly wanted to come in for the purposes of walking and providing you with information on the legislation. I think it's important that you understand the details of it, and if you have suggestions, myself and the Board of Selectmen no doubt would like to hear what those would be in terms of changes to the language. I mean, what I'd like to do is is go into town meeting and be a unified front, because I think something like this, it's important to establish the fact that we're all supporting a proposal, and if we can do so, that's the reason why this is being presented at this time rather than 2 weeks before town meeting.
Well, I think that's highly unlikely, mostly because of the time. There's just not enough time here to build any kind of consensus, which kind of brings up the point. This was presented on first on August 15th or 16th. The town meeting that you're talking about is in November, correct?
That's correct.
Okay. So why is this being so seemingly fast-tracked?
I don't necessarily think it is being fast-tracked. I think the fact that it's been talked about at least 3 times over the last 15 years would indicate that the issue has been discussed publicly. People are aware of the fact that there's been proposals in the past to create a Department of Public Works. So what seemed to be missing was the piece that we just went through.
Okay. I'm not sure I really agree with that. I mean,
Just started into it. Is there going to be a public hearing on this before it goes to the town?
Sure, there's no doubt that it's up to the board, my board, and there's no doubt I would recommend to my board they hold a hearing.
So there is right now still a sitting Department of Public Works study committee. That committee has not issued a report. You already mentioned in the past there have been several unsuccessful reviews of this that have failed for one reason or another. At least 2 DPW study committees that failed to issue a positive report, and at least 2 proposed charter changes or charters that actually had it as the keystone, the creation of the Department of Public Works, which, if my memory serves me correct, was probably key to its defeat. So we have a study committee. The committee has not reported back. In spite of that, we're basically issuing a report in the absence of our committee's report. Why is that?
Well, I'm not representing any committee, so I'm not
But
here.
it's your committee.
I'm not here to take the place of any committee. What I'm here to do is, at the request of the Board of Selectmen, to propose a way of creating a Department of Public Works based upon discussions that have taken place at length in the past. In terms of why it hasn't been referred to a committee, my feeling is that the matter is really a discussion of crafting and creating legislation to create the DPW.
Okay, then let's just talk about it in terms of change.
Sure.
The way change is normally accomplished in town government. Okay, I was the chairman of the study committee to build a new library. That committee issued a report. That committee turned into a feasibility committee. we studied the financial feasibility of building a new library. That committee issued a report. It went to town meeting created a building committee. I mean, these things tend to happen in steps. And one of the main reasons that they happen that way, I think, is so that consensus can be built. What I'm getting at here is, why are we so tied down to this November?
I would defer to my board members. I'm not necessarily tied down to that date, but I think it's important to bring forward issues. There's been some changes in your department where you had a person that left. I think that it's particularly relevant to have this discussion within proximity to the fact that there's a person that left the department.
Who, as you know, is not being replaced.
I'm aware of that. I'm not aware of what your long-term plans are.
Okay. I have a couple of questions, if you don't mind. Back on the first page of the proposal, Town of Dudley proposal for Department of Public Works, the A through G, those reasons for doing this. And the main reasons why I have reservations with this proposal, and I had reservations the last 2 times that it was studied as a water and sewer user. The ones I have concern or question with is C, to reduce the operating costs of town government. I see it as an increase in cost, not a decrease, because it adds layers of government. E, provide a broader opportunity for employee development and cross-training, as that exists now, within the constraints of collective bargaining, of course. And then F, ensure greater accountability within the organization and to the public, assure accurate income and expense allocation. The enterprises, you know, the funds are kept separate for a reason. Having that munched into a general budget makes it very difficult, and that's shown in other communities where it is. Maintaining, but I just have, the main concern I have is reducing operating costs. I just don't see it as a reduction of cost. I see it as an increase, a huge increase.
Why?
And that increase would be borne, as I see it, to a greater extent by the enterprises.
Where would the increase, what specific items would?
Okay.
Excuse me,
If we go-
excuse me one
okay.
second. Could we have all conversation through the chair? And at this point, what I'd like to do on that question is I would just like to give the town administrator an opportunity to maybe answer the broader question that this is getting at. What study has been done on this that defines or indicates exactly what the savings will be?
Well, I intend to, in the process of analyzing what those cost savings will be, and I will present those. I would be a fool to make a proposal and a recommendation to town meeting and not be able to respond to that question. So what I'm doing is I'm doing an analysis of what those cost savings are, and I would be happy to forward a copy of it to you when I'm complete.
But couldn't it also be said then that to make this kind of proposal before you know whether or not there are any savings, that doesn't make sense either? I'm not saying it's foolish, that was your word, but how does that make sense?
It makes sense because the Department of Public, because there are a number of communities that are adopting public works. Within the last 2 years, within the last year, the town of Holliston has created a Department of Public Works. Prior to that, the town of Auburn created the Department of Public Works. There are a number of communities that are migrating from government structures similar to what we have to a consolidated Department of Public Works. And it to me, makes sense that you have employees who can respond to issues, whether they are water issues, sewer issues, highways, snow, parks issues and such, in force as a larger group and number of employees. And that would create efficiency And that is the reason why you would want to have a Department of Public Works, is because it gives you a larger group and a larger organization to respond to the needs of town government.
Okay, but clearly, it's not just a question of being able to establish a Department of Public Works. I think that your presentation tonight here and what's transpired over the past couple of weeks clearly outlines the fact that it might be very easy to establish a Department of Public Works. But the question is, does it make sense for Dudley? And once again, this comes back to the issue of why are we tied into this November time frame if this study that we're talking about has not yet been done.
Mr. Chairman, the town administrator is absolutely working under the unanimous direction of the Board of Selectmen to start looking into this issue. There's no question about that. And I think, speaking for myself and what I've gleaned from some other conversations with board members, is that we haven't made much progress in 15 years towards even deciding whether it's a good idea or not. And sometimes I think that a deadline tends to drive progress. Even if that deadline, results in the answer of not yet, it tends to drive progress. And so I think that might be some of the fallout that you may. Your board may feel as though you're being pressured. I'm under no obligation to vote to put this on the warrant or to vote for it at town meeting as a citizen. But we are at least having a conversation now about it. So I think that is a step in the right direction as opposed to the direction we've taken in the past, which has resulted in almost nothing.
I was on 3 of those boards to study it. The first 2 came back saying it wasn't in the best interest at the time for the sewer, because I was a sewer commissioner, for the sewer users. The last board hasn't finished. From what I understand, we haven't met to make our recommendation. So I don't know why this is getting pushed forward without that board's recommendation one way or the other.
Well, I think, Mr. Chairman, the good news is that we now working for us a person who's been a town administrator and worked as a manager and an administrator in the environments with DPWs since just about when he graduated college. So we now have someone who's actually seen both sides of this and can kind of guide the process for us a little better, as opposed to some of the more subjective conclusions we've come to in the past.
Mr. Marble, you were cut off there.
No, I'm okay. I just, well, people pretty much covered what my thinking was actually.
Yeah, Mr. Chairman, Jonathan, I'll just echo what he had to say. The last I was on that committee with you guys as well, it did seem like we didn't sort of finish it. I think and it was because we didn't have the town administrator had left in that time, so I think it sort of fizzled out. I think the next step was going to be bringing somebody from another town in to sort of make a presentation to us on why it does work. So I look at Greg as someone who's already seen both sides of it to take the place of that.
Then wouldn't the logical next step be for Greg to participate in the review of this as part of that study committee, not to actually sidestep or jump over or dismiss? Committees are established for a purpose. They need to deliver a report. Sometimes they are dissolved. This committee's been neither one. This is a sitting committee. Okay? And I think it could benefit greatly from Greg's participation. But my question is, we have the vehicle in place to study this. As Mr. Fox stated, we could all benefit greatly from a unanimous report between the Water Sewer Commissioners, the Board of Selectmen. Our chances are greatest always of having the most significant change when we are together on something. You just can't expect something to come together like this in such a short period of time, especially given the contentious nature of this, which we're hopefully going to avoid a little bit of tonight.
The way I looked at this is I looked at this as an opportunity for all of us to work together. And if there is a committee, I suggest that the committee also starts to perform and send in their recommendations. We're not trying to ram anything, but we would like people to take this proposal very seriously and take a good look at it. I am very pleased that we have a town administrator that has experience in this field, where previously Dudley has never had that opportunity before. We have a rare opportunity now to make a solid recommendation if we all work together.
Mr. Chairman, just to add to Mr. Fox's point, and for everybody to assume positive intent going in, that when nobody is trying to ram anything through. I think when we were on the last time, I think we got spun around the axle on a few issues. We sort of talked in circles, I think, and the same stuff kept coming up. So I think we got stuck a little bit. Maybe I think I chaired that meeting. Maybe that was my fault for letting that go on. But I mean, like I said, you were there. Thank you. But having Greg there to guide us, I think, through some of these, and like what these other towns did. You know, I think we've heard a lot, well, they won't benefit us. We've done this. Our trucks, their trucks, you know, helping out, who's going to pay for what. I think we focused on the very tactical things, is what I recall of that. But I don't disagree that we should meet again and do so, and to look at this with Greg as the guest speaker, so to speak, rather than, I think, somebody from Uxbridge, I think, was supposed to come and talk to us. Is that Uxbridge?
I think that I agree with you. Okay, I'm on that committee, as you know, and the central issue there does have to do with a point that is very much germane to this whole discussion. The point you're talking about, the fact that we have 4,800 household dwellings and a small number of commercial residents in this town, residents and businesses, and we only have 2,800 contributors to that water enterprise and 1,300 contributors to the sewer enterprise. So the issue of who pays for what is a very important issue, because without attention to that, some people are paying more and some people are paying less for their enjoyment of all we have here in Dudley.
Yep.
And that's always been the central point in every DPW discussion and the charter discussions. So I don't think it's spinning around as much. It could be the deal breaker.
If I may, Mr. Chairman, I think I didn't mean from that standpoint costs of, like, you know, well, if John's plowing for Danny, if we were putting our resources together and the truck breaks, you know, that's what I meant. Like, who pays to fix the truck? Does it come out of the enterprise fund? Does it come out of the? That's what I kind of meant there. But it's a point well taken, right? There's a small amount of water and sewer users to compare to the whole, right? I got you.
Question still arises.
I think that question is very pertinent because
Right.
that needs to be answered before this goes together.
Section 3, that can be brought up. Mr. Chairman, just one question when Greg was speaking about the surrounding towns. One thing we have to be aware of, you mentioned the town of Albany, larger town, but also their water department is a water district. They are not part of the DPW in Auburn. And when you look at several other towns, Leicester, I believe that's a water district. Grafton is a water district. And several other towns have water and sewer districts, and they do not participate in the DPW program.
Just going back to some of the answers that were given earlier, and I guess it rises to be to eliminate the conflicts between departments and ensure coordination and efficiency. I was the water commissioner a number of years ago. Had a break, became a sewer commissioner. Had a break, and then back to the combined board. And yeah, I'll agree, back in the first time I served, there was a bit of acrimony between the departments. That has greatly decreased over the last few years. If the water department needs help, they call the highway department comes down and helps them. And the water department pays those people. Same for the sewer department. I just don't see, again, I just don't see the benefit. I don't see the great benefit. As to the costs, you've got a DPW director that's new. You've got an engineering and stormwater department, which is proposed for the future. That's new. Fleet maintenance, there are mechanics now, but that's a new department as well. Those are all add-ons to what is now currently existing. Your water and sewer superintendent, I would assume, is still going to exist. Your highway superintendent is still going to exist, I'm assuming. Your buildings people will still exist. I see added positions, not less. And so I don't see the cost savings. I just don't see it. But we can discuss that at greater length during the public hearings, I guess.
Mr. Chairman, I think in fairness to the town administrator, I think we have to give him the opportunity to do his cost study analysis of what the benefits of this is going to be. And Mr. Chairman, you're right. You'd like to see what those numbers look like, but we need to give him a chance to further define what the pros and cons are going to be, especially financially. So before we just say, well, it's going to cost more, we need to do that cost analysis to find out whether we're going to save money or we're not going to save money.
Okay, just so we're clear, then are you saying that you feel the November timeframe is unreasonable?
No, I didn't say that. I said I think we have to give the administrator an opportunity to do his financial analysis and submit it to you. I think this meeting is a wonderful step forward. I really do. And I hope all of us would seriously consider this proposal. And I think we have to give the administrator a chance to complete his analysis.
When might we expect those financial analysis results? It's now mid-September. We've got about 2 months to be able to see these results and be able to either accept them or rebut them with fact. One way or the other, we've got to have time to be able to analyze those results ourselves.
Well, I certainly plan on giving you a financial analysis based upon fact also.
Oh, I understand.
I don't have a dog in the show here.
Sure, I know.
So I'm not here because I got vendettas against anyone or anything like that. I'm here as a professional, recommending to you what I think is right for the town. If the town decides and my board decides I don't want to do it, that's okay. I feel like I've done my job. So I'll give you what I want, but I'm saying none of this to me is personal. I'm not looking to eliminate it. I'm looking what I think is best for the town based upon 32 years of work in this field. Okay, so sometimes, that's kind of how I approach things, and that's how I approach everything. And I'll make decisions that'll be unpopular, and people scratch their head and say, why is this guy doing this? Because I'm doing what I think is right for the town. And I have no problem with people who live here saying, Dudley Cohen's going in the wrong direction. Trust me, I got no problem with that at all. And I've been there, and I'll come back and do it again.
It's just what we and taxpayers, typically with town meeting, things come up, and the paperwork is all sitting there on the table at the beginning of town meeting. Not the right time to be looking at it.
We agree.
To be able to look at it and analyze it and accept it, you need time. When might we? I'm just asking. When might we expect that?
I need to make sure that the books for fiscal year 2015 are closed in their entirety, and
Okay.
so I will be seeing the accountant. This is right about that time of year where we
Sure.
have our balance sheet and our free cash and retained earnings get certified. That's what I'm waiting for, is for the quote-unquote balance sheet to be completed.
Okay.
Couple weeks.
Okay.
Couple weeks.
Just so we have time, and
Yeah.
and that can also be. I'll be honest. Getting information out in the town of Dudley is very difficult.
Yeah.
We've got a couple of signboards, And I don't want to besmirch the local newspaper, but the local newspaper is not the greatest way to get information out to the townspeople.
Right, because
You usually hear about it when you hear that when it's already happened. And it's just to get that information out and get buy-in. We've had other things that we didn't get buy-in on because the information wasn't timely. So,
You know,
that's all.
you make the point very well that you're unbiased here, okay? But I'm not sure that that's enough, because it sometimes takes a long time to really just get an appreciation so that you can be biased or unbiased. You make the point that the timing here is good because we recently had an employee leave. But I think the bigger point that matters most, I think, to the users in this town is the fact that that they haven't had a rate increase, maybe in 10 or 12 years. That we've managed to, as a board, accumulate retained earnings on the water side of $2 million, and on the sewer side, $500,000. Really, in a lot of ways, this board has been a model for financial responsibility, a good example. So to make the point that the timing is right to get rid of a board because an employee has left, but not also talk about really the fact that it's a solid board that has worked well for its users and for the community. Also a board that really I'd like to believe we don't have dogs or ponies in the race either.
I just had a question. With this proposal, you're looking to make a DPW director above, underneath the administrator. How is he going to be paid? Do you know? I mean, has that been settled? Is town money paying for that?
That's really up to the board to think about, but I can tell you how it's been done in the past.
Okay.
So there'd be a person would be paid in proportion to the work that they do. If they do 80% of their work on municipal projects, they would be paid 80%. If they spend 20% of their time working on projects that are within the enterprise fund, then 20% of their salary would come from the enterprise fund.
So there would be a work study done to determine that?
Would there be a work study done? I say, yeah, there would need to be. There'd need to be an analysis. I'm not sure I would call it a work study, but there would need to be an analysis.
So you're not, I'm sorry, I didn't mean to cut you off, I'm sorry.
No, that's okay. Based upon an approximation. It's never going to be perfect because some years it'll require more, but I think it's a fair way to put it.
So he would be hired and then decide after who's paying for him?
That again, that remains to be, that needs to be determined at this point.
Check what other towns do to the chair.
To get it. I'm just, as a commissioner for the water and sewer, I want to see the users of the water and sewer pay their fair share, but only their fair share.
Reasonable.
I make a comment in that same vein. This is pretty typical of the way a company running, a corporation running, and pretty decided usually during the annual budget process as to where the funds get split based on what the estimate of the tasks are that the respective department heads and/or organizations are responsible for, and that's an annual event in most corporations because that's a common problem. It's not a big problem. I mean, once you get used to doing it, and we're doing it now effectively. Right now, the same thing is happening. Okay, so none of us wants to skew, and I think it's been said enough already. One way or the other, the idea is to pay fairly. If the users pay what the value that they're getting for getting. Right now, it sounds like the users are overpaying perhaps a little bit. Sounds to me because such a big surplus. It's nice to have a surplus. I always like surpluses. I wish I had a little more myself, but on the other hand, it sounds like there's a lot of surplus relative to what the potential future need is. Better analyze.
True at all.
Okay, well.
But yeah, we can talk about that
That's
more.
a-
That's another subject. But I think, but in that same vein then, what we need to do perhaps is, I won't speak for Greg, but when he's got his study, his data together, reconvene the committee that we had, and then that would be a good time to air that and go through it and see what it looks like. I mean, and I think we have time to do that. So I think this is a good way to inspire getting the committee back on track again, because we got off track for the numbers, the reasons we talked about before. And I think your point's well taken. This is a good incentive to me. Says, hey, let's get off and just not forget about all the work that we did and the other committees in the past have done. And really, what's in the summary here is a distillation of what the other committees, the committee that I was involved with recently, with you folks, and other committees, is a distillation of what the comments from those committees were and what we got from the outside people. So that's where this came from. Last time, I just want to mention, though, to Scott, just because you brought it up a minute ago. These are, and Greg mentioned earlier, these are not functions that anybody is at, some of these that don't exist now. None of those are being advocated and say we need to start these functions now, because we don't. You said that. These are just boxes for future consideration.
Sure.
It's an opening, so it's not an incremental cost
The stormwater.
at all.
The example of the
Yeah.
stormwater.
But there's no incremental costs built into this at all. You don't need them, you don't have them. And
The-
this is an opportunity.
That stormwater
Yeah.
box would typically be borne by the Water and Sewer Commission, because
Yeah.
that's a Water and Sewer Commission
The-
function, so to speak. So that's something that
Whatever.
actually the taxpayer side would be taking on in this, for the most part.
Well, I want to get to that point.
But, yeah,
The point I'm
that's
trying to make
stuff
is
we
that
can
this is
discuss.
down the road if it's necessary. So this just paints the picture and develops the organization and the structure for the town. This is how we can do some of these things and have flexibility, which I think makes sense.
Mr. Chairman, I still have concern about the timeline, because you're going to need time to get the information together and then get back to the study committee. I would think we'd need more than one meeting, I mean, to make a recommendation or draw up something. Is that feasible to do it in that time before the May meeting? Or is that
November meeting.
November? Yeah.
I think we'll know once we have the stuff from
Right.
through the chair. Sorry, I think through the chair, I think once we have the analysis back from Greg and we meet and then we kind of go over it again, I think having Greg, who's seen some of the issues that we talked about, like we said, with the trucks and everything, how it's handled in other places, I think we might help get unstuck on some things. So it might be okay, and then we might be able to put a set of issues and yes, we're good with these, and then focus on the ones we're not in alignment on after. Mr. Chairman.
On one subject that Tom brought up in regards to, say, a DPW director's salary. Right now, there's no language of a DPW director having like a water license treatment or a distribution license. So that falls on the current water superintendent. Currently, we have no control of our indirect costs that we pay to use the services of the town hall between the water and sewer department. I know we go back and forth on a fire hydrant issue for fire protection. But conceivably, I can see where this could go. You do hire a DPW director, and yes, your water and superintendent has to have interaction with the highway DPW director. So suddenly what you're facing is a 30% salary picked up by the water department, 30% of the salary picked up by the sewer department, and the tax base picking up the balance, 40% for a DPW director. And that would equate to hosing the users.
Again, that's typically part of the negotiation, and it really happens right now, maybe less formally. I'm not involved in that directly, obviously, but again, is it 30%, is it 5%, what is it? And you have that discussion, and that goes between the commissioners and the selectmen and DPW director, town administrator. and you get to a consensus, and it's not typically that difficult, because everybody's working the same time. Everybody wants the same thing, end result to be fair,
Yeah.
and that's just standard business.
But it's, I think that it's such a significant point, though. I don't think you can avoid it. The system that we have right now has amazing protections built into it. The only thing we can spend money on is water. The only thing we can spend money on the sewer side is sewer. What we're talking about introducing here is a whole layer of gray. All of a sudden, things get gray. That $2 million retained earnings that was built by just 50% of this community, and on the sewer side, just 31% of the community, now gets thrown subject to, at risk, into this gray area. Right now, there's just nothing for us to spend money on but water. That's why we've been able to keep the rates stable for 15 years or more. That's why we've been able to develop such a good amount of retained earnings for future use that we won't have to go to the bank for. It's in the bank. Okay? It's interesting, okay? In the entire history of the enterprise, both enterprises, I'm not aware of a single time outside of the establishment of the Webster Sewer Treatment Plant that this enterprise, either one of them, has ever gone to the town to ask for a penny. That's amazing. That's remarkable. It begs the question, why are we willing to put that at risk? You talk about the fact the timing is perfect, we just lost an employee. The elephant in the room is that $2.5 million, okay? And we have one fiduciary responsibility as an elected board, right? It's to the water and sewer users. That's our fiduciary responsibility. Now you put 2 budgets or 3 budgets or enterprise accounts or general accounts under the control of one board, and you don't need a study really to know what's going to happen. That $2 million that you think is too much, it's gone. It's going to dribble away.
To what? Mr. Chairman, to
think
what
we can
though?
do that.
What do you mean? I didn't think that could happen because of the way the enterprise fund's set up.
No.
What would it go to?
No. I think if you go back to the popularity of these DPWs, I think it's all tied back to several rulings of the court that address the issue of control over multiple budgets. And perhaps Greg can speak to that better. But when one board has control over several budgets, the discretion of that board over the mingling of those budgets is brought into play. It's not in play right now. It's protected right now because all we can spend it on is water or sewer. It needs to be studied, and beyond the pluses and minuses of a financial feasibility study, I think it also needs to be looked at, just as I've outlined, from the perspective of protection. We created something a long time ago that did a very good job of protecting that tiny little minority of citizens in this town that contribute to that. On the sewer side, you have 61% of the people that have no right to that money. They haven't contributed to it. They have no desire for it right now, but we're talking about making that budget accessible to risk. And I really wish someone could speak to that. to
Well,
make...
I can speak to the fact, I wholeheartedly understand your concerns about the enterprise fund being rated, for lack of a better word, but the law is pretty clear in terms of what an enterprise fund can be used to. And the Department of Revenue produces a manual on the rules and guidelines for use of an enterprise fund. So if you've got a director and a town administrator who uphold the law, then it's not going to happen the way that you described. You know, it's just my view of it, is you can't use it for general operating expenses. The town has a right to utilize those funds for indirect costs, as you pointed out.
And this is such a difficult discussion to have because, honest to God, I think our present Board of Selectmen and our Finance Board is really one of the best we've ever had. But you can't create change and create, a constitutional change, if you will, like this, without taking into consideration the risks to future generations and other boards we know nothing about. I think that, you talk about the law is very clear. But what Jay just outlined was a discussion on, it was a great discussion, GRAY, G-R-A-Y, one where we're being told what our indirect costs are. We don't have any other choice but just to pay it. There's a whole litany. We could make a list, the thickness of a Bible, of things that could possibly come up. Like, we need a new fire engine, for example. Okay. Now, do the water and sewer unit users benefit from that? I think you could probably make a good legal argument for some contribution there, maybe. Okay, but it's a gray area, and it's one that we don't presently have to deal with. We are opening ourselves up, in my opinion, to exposure to risk that's unnecessary. It's interesting to me that this proposal we just reviewed, it does not talk about the abolishment of the enterprise. The enterprise is good. We agree. It works. Right now, we want to keep it. All we want to do with this change, really, is change who controls the money. Why is that? Why? I think this whole thing would be so much easier to do if we just filed the legislation to eliminate the enterprise. Then it all makes sense. Everything we're talking about, a DPW, the sharing of employees, the thing that makes it not make sense is the fact that enterprise monies are now going to come under the control of another entity. And that's risk.
Mr. Chairman, just a question to Greg. Right now, the sewer department pays indirect costs of somewhere around $53,000 a year for use of town hall and whatnots from the town. What would stop the selectmen from doubling that and say, okay, next year you're going to pay $100,000?
Could do it now.
Well,
But
No, you couldn't, because you'd have us to argue against you.
Wait.
We're not going to be here anymore.
Wait.
That's
The town needs to document its indirect costs when it sets its tax rate every year. So those indirect costs are itemized, and they're reviewed by the Department of Revenue before the Department of Revenue will approve the town's tax rate. So if there's an irregularity, hijacking of money, then the DOI reserves the right to punish the town and the board by saying, we're not going to approve your tax rate.
let me restate that. Okay, it's $53,000 this year. Next year it goes to $63,000, and then the year after that $73,000. What's to stop the selectmen the power of doing that?
Well, I think that it's normal to see an increase in costs. The indirect cost is set up to provide for not only rental, but the biggest cost is health insurance and pensions, but not only active employees, but retayees. So as people leave service, that amount may increase exponentially. It's not necessarily a linear rate of acceleration.
But that's a different line item the sewer and water budgets.
But it's all, again, part, if you look at the indirect cost will take that into account. And ultimately, any enterprise fund has a responsibility for paying those costs, not just Dudley Water and Sewer. Any of them would. And I also just want to point out that if there were to be a deficit in the if there would be a deficit in the retained earnings, then the town is responsible for funding that deficit. And have I seen it happen in 32 years? Yeah. I've seen it happen in the 32 years, and congratulations to Dudley Water and Sewer that hasn't done that, but I've seen it happen. And to me, it proves the point that we're one town. We're one community, and we all try to get everything done for our citizens the best way we possibly can. We help you, sometimes you can help us, but I don't think there's any intent that we want to hijack and take money from the Water and Sewer Department. And I do wholeheartedly understand that there are other communities in this region that do that, and that's not how we want to do business.
I didn't mean to make that impression. I'm concerned with the time when we're not here, 10, 20 years from now, what is in place to stop that from happening?
DOR, Department of Revenue.
Maybe I have a question for Greg. So if, to go to your point, that we, the town, the selectmen, in this case, were to move monies, say 500,000, picked up the number, from the fund, from the retained earnings that they have, the DOR would obviously, am I right to say that the Department of Revenue would be all over that when they come to the
Absolutely. They will review the town's financials, the numbers that comprise the town budget and the water and sewer budget, and the indirect costs when they set the tax rate. Tax rate is set in the fall, November every year. And if there's an irregularity there, then we're asked to explain it. And if the DOR says, no, that doesn't work, then guess what? They won't move our tax rate.
I think that, excuse me, I think that, we can talk about these kind of things all night, but the point you make about $500,000, okay, and I don't want to get semantical, but one of the things that can happen when a single board controls multiple budgets, and the DOR will allow this to happen, the town can borrow money. And once again, I don't want to get semantical, but what's the difference between a loan that is never going to be paid back and taking the money? There's no difference. We talked, one example, okay, about a year ago, a year and a half ago, the town administrator came to us and asked us to pay a bill. It was the bill for reverse 911. And we said, we're more than happy to contribute, okay, because we may use that service. But we shouldn't have to pay the whole thing. Now, that's a discussion that can happen between an elected board. It's not going to happen with an appointed board. And it's also something that the DOR is not going to pick up on if it's paid 100% versus 30% or 20% or 50% or what it actually should be. And you can take that whole discussion time and time again right down the line, and we're really stretching our imagination to believe these aren't the types of things that are going to happen. And in my mind, I just can't buy into the idea that this is all about things working out more harmoniously between departments. I think this is about $2.5 million.
No, it's exactly what you just said in the first place is what this has been about, as far as I am personally concerned.
But the harmony,
the
harmony that you talk about was the very first issue that you brought up in the study committee. And Dan Guyan was on that committee, John Meehan was on the committee, and at the time Louis Gribb was on the committee. And I think we did a wonderful job of explaining that we have tremendous interdepartment sharing, tremendous interdepartment cooperation. In spite of anything that anyone might think, those are misconceptions. And that's why you need a study committee.
To the point of the enterprise. Enterprise, as I understand it, and this is coming back from something that came up during my first stint as a water commissioner. And the town administrator there actually came and wanted to borrow money. The DOR said absolutely not. It's not allowed, it's illegal. That was Mr. Sander. That was years ago.
It's illegal as it stands right now with 2 elected boards.
But
When you bring that money under the control of one board, it is not illegal.
the only way that enterprise, as I understand it now, can be used is for the cost of the department. It can be abated back to, or for reducing rates.
Correct.
And abated back to the users. Or, as I understand it, it can be taken at town meeting, by a town meeting vote.
It's presently
It's
protected.
very, those are tough. Those kind of votes are tough. But it's very well protected. And there are ways to munch monies. I'm involved in another department in town, and it's less formal, but there are ways to justify across lines into the gray area. It's there, it happens. We're all human beings. It's easy to do. Even with my comments, I have reservations, but I have not. I'm not hard and fast in them. But I want to see some. I need to see numbers. I need to see concrete stuff to be able to base this on. To eliminate the what ifs and all of that. And that's the big thing of the financials. I guess I just need to wait for that.
Oh, Dan, Mr. Chairman, typically I'm caught off guard that I see 2.5 in front of me. I didn't think it was that high the last time we looked at it. So typically what we've done, when we see growth in the retained earnings, we pick a project. That's how we did Healy Road. That's how we did Dudley Oxford Road. We spent money on, like I said, we have a list a mile long of improvements we've done, but I'll say this much now, if once those numbers are confirmed, and I believe we have over $1 million in debt we're paying off now, give or take. So take 2.5 down to 1.5 because you're carrying the debt that we have to pay off. And we're actually still paying debt from the water main construction on West Main Street 20 years ago, right? That's a state revolving loan that we're paying for. Corrosion control. And corrosion control, but quite honestly, when I look at that type of money, the first thing that comes to my mind, what's the next capital improvement I can do for the users? And that would be, a new well source, or a new replace a mile of old pipe within the system. So if you're looking at that, thinking that's a great piggy bank, it's not a great piggy bank because you can rest assured it will be diminished shortly on an improvement.
Yeah. We should bring this up as
Yep, part of the study
Next meeting.
committee. Yep.
a study committee. Set a date for that.
One last point, and this is a point that I hope I can suggest without offending anybody. Our average town meeting has somewhere between 68 and 88 people in attendance, most of which are town employees. You talk about how many communities have recently gone towards DPW. It's like anything else. When you're in the business, you learn how to do it. Maybe this is even too easy to change. Why can't we consider putting this also, once it gets to that point, on the ballot? So the whole town can decide. Has any consideration been given to that?
We'll wait for council to rule on whether that's appropriate or not. It's really a legal issue.
Okay. So there's a lot that needs to be done in a very short period of time. And I still don't think we have a firm grip on whether or not we as an elected board have any ability to influence it whatsoever. But as I said earlier, I've been very impressed with this Board of Selectmen. The little contact that I've had with you so far, Greg, I've been very impressed as well. I hope that you'll take our comments here tonight as we will take yours and work it into our consideration. Is there anything else?
Well said.
Just to piggyback on that, I've always, for the third time now on this board, it's always been for the same reason. I'm a user. I'm a sewer user. I'm a water user. I want my number one concern is to keep that as efficient and keep it keep the rates as low as they can be. Sewer rates are not that great, I'll be honest, but they are what they are. We've got 75% of our budget is fixed on the sewer side. We can't do anything about it. You can't cut it. It's not possible. That and anything I do or say is always with that in mind. I'm not. Other than that, I don't. I have no acrimony towards anybody or anything as far as this is concerned. I just want to make sure everything is right before I buy in.
I have a suggestion, and just throw it out there. Why don't we set a meeting for a couple of weeks from now when Greg will have some facts, and I think maybe what we want to have also, which based on what you made, maybe we want to have a legal person here, so the attorney here, talk about what the legal separations are and what the issues are between the two boards and the one, because that's what I'm hearing too, is that that's a concern, and there's some legal questions or things that I think attorney can clear up a little bit better for us. And I think if we had that kind of representation at the meeting, maybe that would do us all some good, and we'll learn something from that. So if we could set something up a couple of weeks from now, or 3, or whatever, to squeeze it in, and try to keep the momentum. In other words, we sort of lost momentum for the reasons that we said earlier, and this is, I think, is an opportunity, as somebody said, to get things on the table more formally than we've done in the past, and wrap it up one way or the other. Okay, and I certainly agree with you that we want to all have as best we can have some sort of consensus. Certainly, that's all of our ideals. Okay.
John, I believe you're chairman of that committee.
At that time, I think I was. So we can either keep that or go. I think you and I were the board representatives.
Yeah, that's right. Yeah.
So for something like this, I would still like to have the meeting posted, so give a chance for all 5 of us to come to that. It's something as big as this. So
It's the same on our side.
right.
Who's on that committee?
The
Members.
Danny,
Dan?
Tom, Danny Guyon, Louis, John,
And Mr. Siganovich.
Kerry. It was you and Kerry, right?
Yeah.
That's right. That's correct. So we could get the band back together, so to speak, and if anybody else wants to attend, and Greg, obviously. That was at the very
Greg's gonna
tail.
be the star of the show.
Yeah,
at that
well,
meeting.
right, because he's going to have the questions. You'll hear, Greg, Mr. Chairman, you'll hear is the concerns, if you haven't heard them already, on some of the things that we were talking about. Real things, and how we would move past it, I think, is what I would like to see out of that. Because I think we were just stuck, right? And we were going to try to get input from other towns, and well, Dudley would like to look at this, but how? So, I think that would be good.
I know we could get a representative from Auburn to come.
We still could.
We could.
I mean, like I said, Greg
I
Greg
happened
has
to run into Bill today. He's the chairman.
Oh.
I ran into him at the side of the road.
Oh,
Not
there you
literally,
go.
but
Side of the road.
Hey, chat.
But are we looking time-wise? Are we having one meeting and deciding? or
Well,
we
I think we need a
2 or 3, or?
Well, why don't we see what develops?
Depends on what comes out of it, right? If we can, like I said, if we can, Mr. Chair, if we can.
When does,
Okay, excuse me. Let's post a meeting.
Okay, let's get it posted and see what we can get through, right? Yeah, I think that would be good.
when does the warrant have to be? When does the warrant close for town meeting?
October 2nd.
October 2nd, that's in
Correct.
3 weeks. Wow.
That's when it closes.
October 2nd, that's 2 weeks and 2 days from now. So that warrant's going to close with this on there.
Well,
Table it, so, yeah.
So,
I'd like to suggest we find a reprieve from this this timing constraint, and maybe this is something that you could discuss at your next meeting.
Okay.
See what comes out.
I don't, Mr. Chairman, I don't think we were wedded to that, just to the fall town meeting. I think there was some things that have happened that made it, gave us an opening to talk about it again, but I think if we determine that it needs to go to the spring or something, I don't see it.
I don't, what it's proposed
Why we
right
don't.
now is a fall meeting.
Yeah,
Right, we're looking at 2.5 weeks. I mean,
Weeks for the warrant.
we're lucky if we get one meeting. And
right.
Mr. Chairman, I agree with Alan's suggestion. In order to put everybody at a more comfortable level, I think a legal opinion of what we can do and what we cannot do concerning enterprise money is very important. And I also agree that hopefully we'll go forward with this, but whatever we do, we have to do right.
Do it once, do it right.
And, Mr. Chairman, just the thing about the whole rating of funds, and I find myself, and I hope everybody else is thinking the same thing. I think Tom said it earlier, we're not going to be here in 20 years. I mean, this board's not going to let it happen, but what happens in the future? I get that. That's a very real feeling. That's a visceral feeling I have. When I hear that, I'm like, I'm not going to let that happen. Not on my watch. But the bad old days are gone, but what if the bad old days came back, right? And people...
And for the people at home, okay, we wouldn't even be having this discussion if we were talking about the same currencies, okay? But once again, we have only 31% of the people contributing to that enterprise on the sewer side, and only 51% on the water side. So those people need to be represented.
I agree.
So we're going to set another meeting date tonight,
Yep.
or is that?
Mr. Chairman.
No, I don't think that's what we said we were going to do. We said we were going to host a meeting for the DPW study committee.
And yeah, right, that we did say that. I was hoping Greg would have his analysis done by then, and then that could be an input to the meeting.
And in addition to that, we said we were very hopeful that at Monday night's selectmen's meeting, this could be discussed, and maybe we could get a reprieve from this time constraint,
Yeah, that would be the 28th.
the 28th.
Greg, if you could put that on the agenda and then ask Michelle, well, I think it's the cart before the horse through the chair, that once we get your analysis based on all the other things, then we can pick it.
That's October 28th.
Post it. Thanks.
28th is the next selectmen's meeting?
Thank you, guys. Yeah, 28.
Okay, so just so we're clear one last time, we are going to host a meeting for the DPW study committee, and hopefully we'll have full selectmen participation in that, along with Greg's participation. And at the next selectmen's meeting, hopefully we can discuss this meeting. You can discuss, not we. Hopefully you can discuss this meeting, and we can get some kind of reprieve on this
Are you
timing issue.
looking for all the selectmen to be at your study committee meeting? Yep.
Well,
Or
you're represented there. Your participation is welcome there, but it's not required.
Peter, I think at least posting it and have it like this meeting. I think Michelle posted this in case all 5 of us came. I think Steve, if he didn't have to work, he would have been here too. So at least we all have the opportunity to come. I think Jay and I will be.
sit and listen.
Absolutely. Absolutely. But I think the posting of that meeting, I think once he knows about his analysis, I think that'll drive that. But it's on the agenda. Talk
Thank you very much.
Thank you, board. Appreciate the time.
This copy, can I keep this?